Good
Hey,
morning.
Nick. Guess we should ping the others.
Yeah, it's nice to actually say good morning and have it be accurate for both of us.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Tim.
Hey, Tim's here.
Oh.
I'm having some bandwidth issues, so I'm gonna leave video off.
Okay.
Sure.
I dropped an item in the agenda. I'd actually put it on next meeting, but I need to move it down to current meeting, I guess. That makes more sense. May 12th meeting.
Yep.
Previously, when we met, I had been going to send out a message to KDev saying, hey, we think this is implementable. Give the normal lazy consensus number of days and just kind of be that one more chance for people to object or support publicly if they wanted to. But in the meantime, planning things around the 119 release brought up some LTS related topics, and there was a lot of back and forth on what could or should be done and differences of expectation. So I feel like in January we'd had these conversations around like LTS, we think it's implementable, and that's where Nick, like, you had a bunch of people be like, "Whoa, wait a second, this
Yeah.
really?"
Yeah.
And we said, "Okay, we'll hold off to 119, try again." And in the meantime, some positive changes have happened as well. Like you can pass conformance now with GA only APIs, and there've been continual improvements. Another notable one, like we still have our looming issues with respect to the Golang dependency in the tool chain, but we're at least now all Go mod instead of older and newer style of that whole set of things. So 119 is a place where we're better off in that regard because 115 has gone out of support. But then that kind of brought up this question of, oh wait, you meant only for 119 and forward, not as of 119 operationally that we would be supporting things for longer. And that's a notable distinction because it means a retroactive change, really, if we were to go that direction. It's the distinction between saying for 119 and greater versus as of this summer we start offering longer support is a big difference.
Yeah. It's a year's difference, right?
Well, our cap was always 119 and forward.
That's the way we've been talking, but I guess people haven't quite heard it that way consistently.
Well, I think it got overtaken by the desire of the release team to extend the release to take into account people's iffy availability during coronavirus times, because the previous standard was we support 3 releases, and if we're releasing 119 really late deliberately, we end up supporting 1 release for a year because that's the 3 release barrier, if you follow me. So I'm not sure necessarily people assumed things about the LTS cap. I think that it got overtaken by events.
And that's maybe the way we should discuss this going forward, is say, like, we definitely are proposing that for 119 and later, this is implementable. But now let's have a conversation. And I think that's kind of in Stephen's email, we will plan, instead of saying 115, moving back to we'll plan on extending the support of Kubernetes 1.16. We need to talk about what that plan would be, and where people weren't comfortable with it in January, is there some pragmatic middle ground where we could look at some best effort support still for 118, 117, 116, some combination of those? Or do people really only want to do 119 and later? Like we could mark the kappas for 119 and later, but then have a separate discussion about the in-between.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yep. Hello, Sam.
Hi, thanks for hosting these meetings.
Yeah.
My organization is keenly interested in this topic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were just discussing how the extension of the schedule for 119 has affected what was our original cap proposal. And, the Tim brought up, because the question is open, what are we going to end up doing about 117 and 118? Right? Particularly if the release team goes back to a 4 releases per year schedule. Although, thinking about where we are, right, through 120, that's 3 releases this year. So the only release that could be 3 months in length would be 121. And then after that, we're on to the 119 support timeline, if you follow me.
That does make sense, yeah.
So I guess what would be the special problems with supporting 117 and 118 for a year?
Before we go into that, do you explicitly exclude 116 for a reason?
Because the release team and release engineering have already committed to supporting 116 through August.
Okay. I guess I've been thinking of this more from the community perspective, where in this working group, we were trying to figure out, like, one of the big objections, how to handle, like, the SIG saying they don't want to do support for longer. Like, the release team being able to build 116 doesn't mean that people are going to be patching fixes, or technically able, like, depending on what the patch is, that could require significant work to backport or fork. Like, are we going to be forking Golang? Like, some of these things are going to hit us potentially in the next few months.
Right. So I guess the question is, supposedly that fight should have already happened based on Stephen and Taylor's proposal. So what came of that? I mean, mind you, I'm not sure that everybody understands what Stephen and Taylor are proposing for 116, because the release of the proposal was kind of garbled.
I think as our LTS conversations have happened, we've gotten into a whole lot of the details of complexity of, because it's easy to say, well, let's just support 116 for a few more months.
Yeah.
But the actual operational details of what that will mean, we've not operationalized, and there's some lack of confidence in our ability to do it, I would say.
I guess the question is, part of it is, one of the things I would actually like to get on is some of our champion backporters. Like, this would be a good pick group, some of our champion backporters, like Liggett and Dims and Deads, people who do a lot of backporting of patches, and to get their updated perspective on things. Because, I mean, I would expect the year ago release, by the time it is in its last 3-4 months, to be getting fewer patches, if you follow me. Just because, it'll be getting back patches of whatever has been fixed on the current release, but probably not any of its own unique patches, unless somebody finds a security hole in only that version. Oh, hey, speaking of whom,
Hey. I would probably group the work into three-ish areas. So there's just sort of the release, staffing, release, and CI jobs, like just kind of keep the ship running. Nothing particularly special there. And it sounds like we can keep the CI jobs running and we can cut patch releases. Like that's understood. Then there's the Kubernetes fixes that get backported. And I think that's also pretty well understood. And the further back we pick things, the more likely it is that the code has changed in ways that make a backport unfeasible. And so we've made judgment calls there in the past. We've said this bug existed, back 2 or 3 releases, but the risk of picking this fix back outweighs the benefit or the severity. So we're actually only going to pick this back 1 release. We've made that call before, but that's within our control, right? It's our code. We can pick it back if the severity and the benefit outweighs the risk. The last piece is what Tim was talking about, like dependencies. So there are 2 schools of thought to this. One is for us to say we support in releases back, that means every single dependency we have must also be supported for that duration. That's one school of thought. The other school of thought is we will pick up security fixes that are made available in those dependencies. So if we have a version of Kubernetes that is on a version of Go that's 3 releases old, well, Go isn't releasing security updates for that version anymore. So we will pick up any security fixes available on the Go version for that build of Kubernetes. And turns out there aren't any more available. That's the other way to look at it. I tend to think that supporting the Kubernetes aspects, the code that we have in our control, gives people on those releases a choice. If a Go security issue is found, well, to pick up the fix for that, you need to upgrade to a newer version of Kubernetes. Not because of anything Kubernetes has done, but because that's the version built with that Go version. I would like to see Go extend their support policy. I'm kind of making moves in that direction to try to stir up some of that discussion. But until that happens, I still think there's benefit in taking the Kubernetes issues. But by far, most of the things that make it into Kubernetes patch releases are fixes to Kubernetes bugs in our code. So if we think of those 3 areas, like the rel-eng, CI job, just mechanics, the backports where we're already making judgment calls about whether how many releases back a fix should go, and then the dependencies. I don't see the dependencies thing as blocking supporting our own bug fixes back another release.
Okay. Well, so I don't know when you joined us, but one of the things we were discussing is the extension of the schedule for 119 has brought up an issue in terms of what schedule 117 and 118 are going to receive patches on, because it would be really weird to have 116 de facto supported for a year and then revert to 9 months of support for 117 and 18, and then extend the support of 119 for a year. But there might actually be technical reasons to do that.
So 119 and 120 are 4-month releases. Is that the current state?
You mean 4-quarter releases? Yeah. Well, the LTS is specifically Oh, you mean in terms of the amount of time to build them? Yeah.
So 119
actually,
and 120.
119 is like 4.5 months, but yeah.
Okay. All right.
I mean, for that matter, Tim was bringing up the fact that he didn't feel like there had been enough discussion around the extension of 116 support and how difficult that was actually going to be.
Well, I was definitely more worried about 115. I think 116 is probably a lot better off, but we hadn't gone into specifics on it versus having a list of things that were worries in 115.
Yeah, well, we dropped the extension of 115 support from Stephen and Taylor's proposal because that was a mistake anyway. It should have been 116 in the first place, and 115 has some special problems. At least
What
that's
were
how
those
I
special
understand
problems?
how everything came out.
Sorry, could someone quickly summarize what those problems were, or do we know?
There's a couple links to the conversations in the minutes. Let me just drop the minutes link in Zoom, and then I'll speak to it. So what were all of the problems that we talked about there? Just pulling up the thread because multiple people chimed in with different things. Or was it all in that thread? I thought more than Christoph had mentioned. So Christoph mentioned the issues with dependencies and Golang, but I thought a couple other people had chimed in. Maybe that was separately on Slack. There were some test-related things, if I recall correctly, from on the test info side.
Yeah.
And a lot of the conversation that are like, as we've been discussing this, the things that people weren't happy with in 115, we talked about a year ago, kind of, in 116. Like each release, as we were talking about LTS and what might be an acceptance criteria to start doing longer support. At any point in time, people had things that were currently on their mind, but the further we go back, the more it's like, I remember there was something bugging me back then, but what was it?
The two things that I was most aware of in 116 or in 115 were the Go version. So 116, 117, and 118, I think, are all on the same Go version, which is helpful. 115 was one version back, and that's out of support now. And then the other was the deprecated API, Kubernetes APIs that were removed in 116. There's a lot of people sort of waiting for 116 to be the oldest supported release, at which point they will.
Well, 116, 116 is now the oldest supported release.
Right. So people who are waiting for that to happen so they could drop support for the extensions v1 beta 1 workload APIs. And if 115 was going to claw its way back to another 3 months of support, that was sort of a surprise to a lot of people who were making plans based on, like, as of this date, this is what the supported APIs will look like.
Makes sense. Thanks.
So assuming that we are not talking about support for 115, which as far as I know, we're not. I mean, that was how the Kubernetes dev discussion came out, that naming 115 there had been an accident of miscounting.
Yeah, originally when I did the cap, it was, I just picked, I didn't think about that it was about to be the freeze for 118. So I picked that number and, created the biggest panic I've created in open source in my life, which was great. So I think 116 is reasonable.
Yeah. So I guess my question is, in the event that the SIG release goes back to quarterly releases, and the earliest time they would do that would be for version 120. Version 121. Is there some reason why we would end support for 118 after less than a year, or should we just at this point consider, hey, we're basically implementing the LTS yearly support proposal de facto starting with 116? Did everybody follow that, or was that too convoluted the way I just said it?
What you're saying is because like we're going to lengthen the release times of a couple of things. If we're doing 3 versions right now, we're going to be doing 12 months.
Right. So in other words, with our previous support policy, we are going to be supporting 116 and 117 for about a year, based on the 3 release policy. So the only one that we would be dropping from yearly support then potentially would be 118, which at that point starts to look really weird and exceptional. And so the way I would like to look at it is there some reason why we couldn't keep patching 118 for, is there any special problems that would introduce? For that matter, are there special problems being introduced by 116 and 117 that just nobody's discussed because they were too confused by the release team proposal, which is a distinct possibility.
I have a question back to Jordan's point with respect to Go versions. My understanding from this conversation was that 116, 117, and 118 were all built with the same version of Go. When does that end, the support cycle on that version?
That ends September-ish. No,
I thought it was August.
14, 15, August of 2020.
Interesting.
So
okay.
Go 114 is out now, which means Go 113 and 114 are supported. Go 113 is what our current versions use. Once Go 115 comes out in August or September, I forget, of this year, Go 113 will drop support.
So I just dropped a link in the chat. I'll put it in the minutes also, but it's got like a little wheel, a calendar wheel with colors, so you can sort of see how the releases flow in typically for them.
Where is the chat?
The Zoom chat.
Okay. Mine must be lagging. That's right.
Coming to the minutes. I just got to paste.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think I think Jordan's suggestion was the sensible policy, which would allow us to move forward, and in some form we should get that out there to make it project policy, which is that the idea of dependency support is that we will port any patches that come from upstream, but we're not promising that we will generate our own.
Yeah, like we're not gonna maintain our own Golang build or distribution. If the version of Golang that a given Kubernetes release is built on releases patch fixes, security fixes, we will pick those up.
Right, and we're not promising to upgrade the Go version on an old release to make it a supported version, because that would be an incredible pain.
Not just painful. I mean, it comes back to risk, and
yeah.
What we've seen is that switching Go versions often requires changing many things, including versions of other components like etcd or etcd clients, things like that.
I will also say from experience working with customers that customers who have not upgraded their Kubernetes version are not going to upgrade their Go version either.
Right. And I mean, if you actually look at the types of security vulnerabilities fixed in Go, only a subset of them even impact Kubernetes at all. So just because there is a security release of Go, often that is an area of the language or the standard library that Kubernetes does not use or is not affected by. So that's just a data point. Go typically has 1 to 3 security related fixes in a given support stream. And when I looked, maybe around 50%, 50 to 60% of them impacted Kubernetes.
So the support stream being the year lifetime on the thing. I'm just trying to do the math. Are you like absolute number? Are you saying maybe 2 to 4 impact us a year? It feels like it's kind of in that range.
No, in the
Lower?
entire support. So right now, a give and go version is supported for a year. For us, we don't pick it up until a couple months after it's released because there's usually stuff we have to work through and stuff we have to soak. So for us, the effective lifetime is like 10 months. But in the 1 year support time for a Go version, there's typically 1 to 3 security related issues that are fixed. And of those, typically 1 to 2 impact Kubernetes.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you're the which time scale theirs being the year. Yeah, okay. Because that it almost amounts to a 2x delta depending on which way you go, and 2 to 4 sounds worse than half to 1.
Yeah.
So does this factor belong in the LTS proposal? Kind of feels like maybe it does, since it's come up as a question.
I think clarifying, like when we say we support a release, what do we mean? And from my perspective, we mean the same thing we mean today when we say we support 3 releases, which is we'll pick up security fixes from our dependencies. If one of our dependencies doesn't provide a security fix, we don't promise to fork the dependency and maintain our own distribution of it. So just clarifying that. In parallel, I think it makes sense to work on some of our major dependencies to try to get them to improve or lengthen their support, but I don't see it as blocking. But yes, Josh, I think we should clarify, what do we mean by support? We mean we will fix security issues in our code that can be backported in a way where the benefit outweighs the risk, and we will pick up security fixes from dependencies on the versions that this version of Kubernetes is on.
We didn't treat that explicitly in the CAP, and I think that is clearly needed.
Yeah.
Because people hear support and they don't know what support means. They think, I found a bug in this version of Kubernetes and you must fix it and release a new patch version because I found a bug. And like, that's one extreme, right? And then the other extreme is like only this super narrow set of things will be fixed and like pretty much nothing else. And so we're somewhere in the middle. Like we're not going to maintain our own distributions of things, but there's a bar where it's like data loss, security issues that can be fixed. We will fix stuff like that.
I think it feels like the last thing that we need to put in that to be 100% clear is that support of a version of Kubernetes includes supporting whatever API groups are at whatever level in that release as well. I mean, it should go without saying, but hey, maybe it's better to say it explicitly, while we're calling out what does support mean. So for the example of 116 and the 115 to 116 boundary where a bunch of stuff fell out of support, then we'd be like, yes, 116 means everything that is now out of support in 116 is out of support. And stuff that is supported in 116 gets a year of staying at that thing. As we talked about. We talked about it heaps of times before, but I think being explicit about it is probably a good idea.
Yeah. I have a 12:30 call I have to jump onto,
okay.
But I would be in favor of clarifying the dependency stuff, especially because that seemed to be a major roadblock. Like the thought that we have every last thing that touches this version of Kubernetes must also
Yeah.
sign on to this extended policy. That doesn't seem realistic. And I think a lot of the people who are consuming Kubernetes releases would still benefit from us maintaining our issues and picking up what our dependencies make available.
It gives a more clear statement, like we're a clear acknowledgement that those releases may have security vulnerabilities in them, but they are a type of thing that aren't meant for general consumption. For people who have mitigations in place and are able to continue consuming, it is what it is.
I would like a list of our dependencies and how their support statements align with us. I had started a doc a while ago, just so we can call out those gaps. Like, this version of Kubernetes depends on these things, and just so you know, like, this thing falls out of support here. So to be transparent about, like, if there's a Go issue found, it's not going to get fixed after this date.
You know, I have a lifecycle frozen bug open on SIG-Arch that's been open for 2 years, asking them to finalize a list of what we consider our inalienable dependencies.
We
Thanks
all
for
have
joining.
lifecycle frozen bugs, Josh.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining, Jordan.
Yep. Talk to you later.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jordan.
I had a question. Have we, and pardon me, Tim, I know you and I talked at one point, but I have been a little bit late joining this overall discussion, but I'm wondering to what degree have we heard from sort of the collective group of customers about the length of support that they want or need?
So we actually did, in addition to a lot of individual sort of customer response, and the response from that for customers is they always want longer support. But we did a large survey that actually got a very good response, you know, including a response from like 300 end users. And that was how we picked the 1-year term. It's referred to in the KEP there, and we've got some graphs from the survey, but it really was showing us that there was this large cluster, like almost 30% of our users, that was just 1 to 4 months out of support. Now, our big worry in the LTS that we can only verify by implementing it is, if we push the supported period out for a year, will that cluster of users just move further back, right? To what degree is this a cluster of users who needs an annual cycle to upgrade, which we know is some of them by anecdotal evidence, versus how many of them are people who simply don't look at upgrading until they know they're already EOL. And I think both groups exist, but we don't have a good way to tell what size, because if you ask somebody if they're in the second group, they won't tell you the truth. Nobody's going to admit that that's their de facto policy.
And then the thing that we're realizing just in the last couple of weeks, hearing more of, is that there's probably more. So our survey was kind of late 2018, early 2019. We suspect there's more people in that later camp because just all of the extra stresses and work and life right now around COVID, there's less resources, less time. So you tend to do the things that you're forced to do because everything's on fire.
Well, I suspect if we took a survey now, we would see a very large cluster on 115 because of the API deprecation boundary.
That also conflates. Yeah, that was a major thing there, and then like all of these, we've got a confluence of multiple factors that have people on a significant speed bump right now.
Yeah, I think the API deprecation boundary is a really important thing about, you know, if we're going to mark 116 as the first one. I think that's actually a good idea. But yeah, the reason that will be a good idea is that it marks the first time when a bunch of API stuff changes.
Yeah, I mean, for a parallel example, we changed type coercions because we had to, because of security holes, rather substantially in Postgres 8.1. well, no, in 8.2 from 8.1. And we ended up with a large cluster of users who did not upgrade off of 8.1 until it was out of support for like 4 years. So I think that's going to happen in the future, and those will be people who go beyond 1 year. That's not something we can solve unless we want to look at supporting things that are 5 years old, which I'm pretty sure we've already ruled out.
The irony is there does appear to be a market for that.
Yeah, well, I mean, ultimately, at a certain point, we say, you know, if that's what you really want, get out your checkbook, and there's a long list of vendors.
Yeah. Yep. That's where we stand.
And that's the trick here, I think, finding the middle ground to where we can amortize some of that cost and do an appropriate amount in the community shared, but that long trailing end is definitely what vendors are, that's their space.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that is relevant for you there, Sam, is that the other, you know, we did find that when we talked to people about it, that there was a level of anecdotal. Yes, it would be nice not to, you know, not to have one of the upgrade windows over a period of years fall in our worst period of the year. So giving you a year period means that retail businesses don't have to upgrade it 1 year over Christmas or, you know, something like that to stay in sport.
Yeah. It does mean that people who are planning in advance can pick their slow time of the year for their annual upgrade.
That makes sense. Cool.
I guess the other thing that is important that we did talk about a lot is that that we won't be changing the, you know, for your annual upgrade will still involve, you know, 3 or 4 actual upgrades. You know, like you have to jump through all the versions. You can't skip.
So as we were chatting this, I tried to make a table of kind of what the options look like in the minutes there. We highlighted definitely issues with 115, the older Golang, like we've already crossed that off. The issues around 116 were the deprecated APIs awaiting their chance for removal. Now, seeing it in table form, that makes that kind of highlights something interesting. If we were to actually suggest instead of 116, 117, then that kind of puts us on the annual cadence because it's the 2019 release.
Yeah, it's
Right.
the last 2019 release. Yeah, so we can be like, okay, good.
And I've got these dates wrong
Yeah,
because I
and
copy-pasted.
that's why I said 2018 would be the only 118 would be the only outlier there.
Yeah.
And that's assuming that we go back to 4 releases a year in 2021, which is by no means certain.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there has been quite a bit of push to lengthen the release cycle for a while anyway, and it may just be like, well, you know.
I mean, I will tell you, as you know, having been release lead a couple of times, that having it be 4 months would make it easier to avoid doing important release things during either a major international holiday or a KubeCon, which has been a serious problem for release scheduling.
Yeah.
Yeah, the KubeCons right now are the timing of the conference-driven development is totally up in the air at this point.
Yeah.
So I mean, I personally think that starting the LTS with 117 would would make sense.
As a vendor with interested customers, I think we'd be comfortable with that.
By the way, where do you work?
The company formerly known as Mesosphere.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
R2D2.
Yeah, that's the one. Cool. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm trying to take a fairly flexible view of the LTS situation overall because we're interested in what the community does. We want to play in that, but at the same time, our customers are probably going to need something longer than what we've talked about here. So we have to figure out how to make that work. So, yeah. Cool. All right. Yeah, I guess I wanted to kind of hear, you know, as a newcomer to the group, are there any areas of contribution, be it, you know, in terms of topical research or whatever, or what kind of contribution would be useful from somebody newly joining this discussion?
I kind of feel like, in a way, I'm hopeful that we're almost wrapping up on this. Like, the working groups in Kubernetes are time boxed, but one of the things that we did early on was kind of split on two vectors. We realized that we had two different things that we were talking about: the support lifetime and the release cadence. We focused in on the support lifetime and are pitching an improvement on that. The release cadence was something that separately we thought deserved some discussion and maybe its own KEP. But in the meantime, that's possibly also kind of resolved out towards a longer cycle time. At that point, we might even start talking about winding this down, and long-term support really just comes down to the active actions of support, being out in the SIGs that you care about, the ones that have the risk of breaking you, helping ensure that their test quality and coverage is meaningful and high, and CI signal is always green, that type of stuff.
Yeah, I would I would vote for not dissolving the working group until probably until the end of 117 support. I feel like there's still going to be stuff for us to do on following up with making sure that, for example, test lifetime gets extended.
Do you mean using this working group as sort of the clearinghouse to, in the British parliamentary sense of the word, whip the changes, to make sure that the required changes happen and that they don't fall through the cracks?
Yeah, and if we get through 117 on that basis, then it's done. At that point, 12 months, at that point, a year of support is normal. And any problems that crop up are basically new problems.
I suppose, yeah. I mean, I think that given that we're meeting on a monthly cadence, that's, effectively like, what are we talking? That's like 15 more meetings total. Something. Kim?
Yeah, I think that's I think it's reasonable, and I think also I like the message that sends, to not just sort of be like, okay, we're done here, but like to be present. And even though, I mean, things have notably quieted down compared to in the past, it feels like we've reached kind of a consensus on what people are willing to do, but then also to have a few people present watching for issues and ready to try and rally towards resolution if we have major things come up. I think that's a good thing to do.
Yeah, okay. So that means so probably, if those of us who are here are in agreement, then we should, I don't know what we do there about setting the sunsetting time for a working group, but
yeah,
feels like something that we should communicate in a format that's not just in our minutes.
Well, there'd be an announcement to Kubernetes dev and a message to the steering committee, I guess.
Yeah.
And for Kubernetes dev, I'd wrap that up in our modifications to the LTS KEP that incorporate, the changes to the release schedule, and how that affects 116, 117, 118. And the clarification of what support means. So, we say we've made all these changes, and oh, by the way, if all these changes are accepted, we would also be wrapping up WGLTS in December when 117 goes out of support.
So in terms of specific action items, I can try and summarize this into an email to KDev and get it out there, propose at a minimum 119 is implementable, and that we think, summarize the reasons for why we think 116 would be better to let go, that 117 and 118 are probably viable to also go ahead and shift over, in addition to 119, to the 12-month support. Propose lazy consensus towards that, and the KEP being implementable. I'll also, with that, I'll PR a clarification on what we're declaring support means within this to the KEP. So the KEP would have a small commit to add maybe kind of a paragraph on what we're saying support is, and then shift provisional to implementable in a commit. And then a summary of this out to KDEV with a lazy consensus ahead of next week's enhancements freeze for 119.
That's
Okay.
good to me. Thanks, Tim.
I think it's everything, yeah?
Yeah, I think we're done.
Okay, thanks. And thanks, Sam, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks,
Yeah,
Sam.
thank you. Even for the short time. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, have a good day, folks. I'll get this. Oh, and I should have said this is a community meeting. We adhere to the community code of conduct. The meeting was recorded. I'll be uploading it to YouTube later, just for the record. Yeah. Have a great day, everyone.
Okay, see you later.